Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I am delighted to welcome an accomplished marketer from Maine, USA, Mr. Gil Rogers. Gil, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Gil is a fractional CMO guiding EdTech to grow revenue and uh, podcast host. He's also a recognized leader in higher education, enrollment management, and marketing. So, Gil, before we talk about your role as a CMO and other marketing topics, tell me about your own journey in brief.
Yeah, so I appreciate you mentioning successful business leaders during the opening. I appreciate that commentary. I think every day most business leaders kind of have the mindset of what can I do more, and to be able to reflect on in a pretty decent spot where I am, and I'm sure you are, and I'm really grateful to be here. So my story is it's getting longer and longer the more time goes on.
Yeah.
But I started my career in higher education as an admissions counselor at the college I went to in Connecticut. I didn't want to get a quote unquote real job when I graduated, so I became an admissions counselor. For those who aren't familiar, those are the people who travel around the country and the world, meeting with students, telling them about the institution, recruiting for the school. And after I was done at that institution, it was a 2-year contract role. I still wanted to do that job because it was fun. I didn't have kids. It was a nice kind of lot to travel opportunity. So I went to another college in Connecticut to do that same job for probably about 6 years. So I've worked in higher education my entire career in various capacities. But after I left the institution side, I spent the rest of my career so far working on the service provider, vendor, partner, consulting service, marketing agency side of the house, doing a variety of things. And I always find myself kind of in that forefront of
Mm.
whatever is next. I was working at a digital marketing company before. Advertising on social media and programming was a regular thing that institutions did. I was working at a video and virtual events company right prior to the COVID pandemic, and when
Hmm.
everything go to video and virtual. I was in an AI company before Chat GPT became cool.
Yeah.
Then almost 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to start my own thing. So I started GR7 Marketing, which is my fractional CMO and marketing
Hmm.
services business. And so I'm excited to be here to kind of share a little bit more about that and share about a little bit more about
Absolutely.
my story.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's now talk about fractional CMO. And since my audience is young, for their benefit, tell me a little bit about how does a fractional CMO work and how can ed tech startups benefit from your model?
Yeah, I think so. I came to the realization when I was starting my company that many EdTech startups, specifically small and medium-sized companies, they, especially when they get some form of an investment, whether it's venture capital or private equity, whatever it is, they know they need to invest in marketing. But a lot of times what happens is they realize that by the time they hire a full-time VP of marketing or head of marketing or whatever title, fancy title you want to give them,
Mm.
that person's compensation, benefits package, equity, all of that stuff
Mm.
takes up a lot of resources if you want to get a good marketing leader. And that was
Mhm.
the last full-time company that I had. That's kind of what I became, was that, highly compensated, high value. But then the reality is that once you're done paying that person, you can't afford to execute the plan that they want
Correct.
to execute, right? You don't have the money for advertising, events, programming, freelancers, design, whatever, right? And so I kind of had that realization and said, what if I were able to work not full time for any one company, but work essentially part time for a few companies that I'm mission aligned with, that are providing resources and help that are going to provide better student outcomes. That's kind of my true north, right? Is like I want to work with companies that are really moving the needle to help students be successful, because that's what I've been working in my entire career. And so rather than paying me that full-time salary, you pay me a fraction, hence the term fractional CMO.
Mm.
And then I can either work with internal resources of the company and lead those resources and delegate tasks and priorities, or I can bring my trusted network of freelancers that I work with that do fractional work
Yeah.
from go to market and design and web development and advertising and search engine optimization. Because I've been working in this space for so
Mhm.
long, I've got folks that
Yeah.
specialize in those specific areas. And then I become kind of the conductor of the band with that group, right? And so for people who are, if you're working at a smaller, medium-sized company, you're like, we need marketing help, we need help with, crafting our messaging, we need a
Mhm.
content plan, we need an event strategy, we need a social strategy. But my full-time marketing CMO it can't be a jack of all trades, right? They need to they want to drive strategy and long-term planning. And so this is that happy medium and a more affordable option than a company just hiring a full-time CMO and then having to fire them 9 months later because they can't support they don't have the runway to support the plan they want to actually execute.
Absolutely. Well said. And given all the work that you've done with so many startups, what, in your view, are some of the common marketing mistakes a lot of startup entrepreneurs make?
I think a lot of times companies, and I'm starting with a new company currently, that the challenge is focus of the existing resources. A lot of times you'll have, a lot of the doers, but not a lot of the planners, or a planner and no doers. And so it's resource allocation when it comes to those sorts of things. A junior level marketing person is needed to be able to get tasks done, but a lot of times they might not have the experience to think strategically about where everything needs to land. I was having a conversation just this morning where we need to drive leads. We need to drive leads. And like, yes, that's the priority of all marketing organizations. I firmly believe marketing exists to support sales in these ed tech companies. But otherwise, we're the party planning committee, right?
Correct.
And you don't want to be just the party planning committee. Don't get me wrong, I love being the party planning committee.
Yeah.
However, there's a more strategic place where marketing events should be taking place. So I think a lot of the mistakes have to
Yeah.
do with expectations with where resources are aligned. And that's one of the first things that I do is look at who do we have on the team, who is touching marketing in any capacity,
Mm.
what is their resource, because a lot of times we'll say, oh, we'll rely on our internal subject matter experts for content. It's like, that's great, except the internal subject matter experts don't work for marketing. They work for client success, or they work for customer relations or whatever. And so everything marketing related becomes a side of the desk project for them,
Well said.
right? And so it's really about resource allocation and understanding that most of the time you have the resources you need. It's more about putting the puzzle pieces together in the right place.
Great response. And one of the other things that always comes up when you're doing a marketing pitch is to build a strong story. How does storytelling play a role in driving engagement and adoption of edtech products, and how do you help your clients?
I am a big fan of, and it's a very dated YouTube video at this
Mhm.
point, but the Simon Sinek Golden Circle, why, how, what model. Starting with why is a critical component of a marketing strategy, because at the end of the day, people don't buy necessarily to solve especially in today's environment, they're not buying extra things. They're buying critical things because their budgets are so tight, and it's really about how do you position your product or service as medicine, not vitamins, right? Medicine helps to solve ills and fix problems.
Correct.
Vitamins, while preventative and helpful and nice, are not necessary, are the first thing to go in your regimen when you're looking at nutrition, because, oh well, I can accomplish that elsewhere, right? And so from a crafting a story perspective, it's really identifying what is that major pain point that you're trying to solve for, and how do you create a moat around your business and really own a category, right? And that was one of the things that I did at one of my prior companies before starting my last company. Is like, we're not creating chat bots, we're
Mm.
creating data collection engines, right? And then the insights from that data are what's the true value are, right? And that's just one example of,
Yeah.
really thinking about how do you position yourself in a way that is not just a widget, right? Because if you're a widget, you're competing with a dime a dozen widgets that are out there in the space. You've got to really be the unique solver of the problem that
Mm.
your customer is trying to fix.
Mm.
And then the last piece of all that is understanding who your customer really is and what the key influencers are. I think a lot of times, many companies, this goes back to your question about mistakes companies make sometimes, is many companies think, oh, well, we need to get right in front of the top officer at institutions. This happens to higher ed tech companies all the time. We need to be talking to the vice president of enrollment because they are the decision maker. And yes, the VP of enrollment needs to be involved in the conversation, but at many, or dean of academic affairs or chancellor, whatever, right? Name the top officer at the division you're looking for. But the reality is that at many companies and many institutions, you have to have some type of a bottom-up strategy as well, especially when you're selling software, right? When it gets in front of the committee or the end users, if it's a company that they've heard a lot of bad things about or tried at a prior company or have never heard of before, that's a much steeper climb to get buy-in from the team than if they've heard of you, seen you, and like you, right? And I'm a big fan of likable companies, right? Being likable can help you to overcome a lot of shortfalls when it comes to features and functionality if you've developed a good relationship and trust in the space.
Well said. Great response. So, you just told me about the who, how, and what when you're, building a storytelling campaign. But how important is data and analytics when it comes to developing marketing strategies for companies, and how do you leverage data?
Data is an interesting one because in the space that I'm in higher ed, right, there are, I say this with the greatest term of endearment, there are a lot of irrational buyers, right, where you can, depending on where you're putting the data in front of them, it could not matter at all. You could have the greatest platform with the greatest conversion rates and let's talk marketing software, right? Like or advertising campaigns. You could have the best results, but if the person you're speaking to doesn't trust you and doesn't like you, they've got other options, and good enough can be good enough for a lot of folks, right? I see it in the CRM space and the CRM adjacent tools all the time, right? If the CRM platform has a built-in text messaging feature and you are a text message company, right, and you've developed this amazing software that has all these great analytics and does all this work, but it doesn't bolt in to the CRM platform and work well, then the out-of-the-box open source solution inside is good enough for companies, right? Whether no matter what your data says and how good your product is, 80% of that is fine if it's built in and works, right? And that's a lesson I've learned over the years at working for companies that are CRM adjacent, video streaming platforms, text message providers, advertising solutions. You can do most of these things inside of Slate CRM or Salesforce or name it, right? But there's all these companies that are doing all of these tack-on features as well. It needs to work well. So data matters for sure, but I think it's much deeper in the buying cycle than people realize. You've got to focus on how you're solving the problem and really get into the emotional element, because these are emotional, irrational buyers in this space. They're not just going to go for the best percentage number. They're going to go for easiest to use, easiest to work with.
Correct. And Gil, what role does social media play in reaching out to educational decision makers, or does it play a role at all?
I think especially in higher education, the industry that I focus on, you ask anybody, when I was interviewing people for my podcast prior to taking a break from that, I would, every episode I would ask people at the end, what are the best ways to get in touch with you? And the immediate response was, well, you can find me on LinkedIn, right? And so they're regular visitors on LinkedIn. I think the perception of LinkedIn has changed from, I remember when LinkedIn was, you're only on there when you're looking for a job. And so if your boss knew you were on LinkedIn, wait, why are you on LinkedIn? Or why are you looking for a job? Right now, it's a news source, it's a networking source, it's a community, right? And so I think you've got to find that balance of organic content from your influencers within your company and paid media, right? There are different uses and different places for these things. When a company I'm working with is like, oh, well, we need to be posting more from our company page. I'm like, well, That I don't disagree with that, but how frequently is your CEO posting thoughtful, meaningful commentary, and how often is your CEO engaging with the content that the company page posts? Because if a tree falls in the woods and nobody's around to hear it, does it make
Yeah.
a sound, right?
Yeah.
And so if you publish a bunch of stuff on your company LinkedIn page, but there's no eyeballs on it,
Mm.
what's the point, right? It's optics. It's the optics of effort, and that's one of the
Mm.
things that I rail against at places is
Mm.
just because you're sitting in your chair at your keyboard doesn't mean you're providing value, right? It's what are we actually creating and doing? And so looking at that organic page content and saying what is content that we should be boosting and where does that live
Yeah.
from a awareness development perspective, a pre-funnel, middle funnel, bottom funnel. That's got to be strategic and I feel like social media is a communication channel just like any other, and it's an advertising channel just like any other advertising channel. You've got to set it up properly and have a good strategy around it. And I think not using it would be to the detriment of most companies. But you got to use it right, right? Like you can't just post every day on your company page
Mm.
with no plan for engagement or additional distribution and expect it to add any value.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And when I was reading about you to prepare for my conversation, you work with multiple segments in the edtech space, in the education space, K to 12, higher education, and lifelong learning. How do you tailor your marketing strategies for these very, very different market segments?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that comes down to, once again, understanding the buyer in those audiences and then having, I don't want to say template because that's not either. Every plan, every company is going to be different, but having a playbook that you can go into and say,
Yeah.
all right, once I understand the buyer, then the tactics kind of fall into place, right? And then the channels might change, the frequency might change. Obviously, the overall messaging is going to change because when you're talking to a K through 12 publisher, it's a different sense of urgency. It's a different challenge than speaking to a dean of online education, right? Like there's different needs, and you're also your sales team is selling different products, right? Like, and so it's really understanding once you understand the buyer persona of the person of your ideal customer profile. Now you've got a foundation to build off of to develop that content plan around and understand, okay, what are our channel, what are our content pillars, what are our content clusters, what are the keywords for SEO, what are the events that we need to really focus on to get in front of these people, what virtual programming can we run, what in-person things, all of that falls into place. It's just the channels are going to be different, or the events are going to be different. The titles you use in programs are going to be different.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you have a playbook of content you can really
Correct.
go off.
Correct. Well said. Well said. And how important is your customer feedback in shaping the message for an edtech product?
I mean, I think customer feedback is tops when it comes and I think constantly I'm working with a company right now where we're doing a set of qualitative research interviews focusing specifically on their ICP because they want that level of feedback, right? And I think you can get a lot from quantitative surveys, and I think there's a lot of value there, but I also think that you miss that human voice and that human perspective if you don't have a qualitative element to it as well. And using that to iterate. You can use performance metrics, you can use site analytics, you can use email open rates and click rates, although that's harder and harder now with different privacy policies and rules. You've got you can downloads of your podcast, right? There's so many different metrics to lean on. And I think that's where getting to the root of mapping out what are my KPIs, and really being thoughtful and stringent about measuring what those are. And I think to go all the way back to the very beginning, when you asked one of the questions about mistakes, is I think a lot of mistakes are made when you have unrealistic expectations as far as what those indicators should be. You can create a reverse, calculation of your sales funnel to say, okay, if we need this many won opportunities and our win rate is this, and that means we need this many, this many, you get to the very top. That means we need 2 million visitors to our website. It's like, no, it doesn't really work that way, right? Like, I think there's there's more to it than that, and you've got to create your baseline and benchmarks first, and then set manageable goals from there. And I think one of the biggest challenge for a lot of people is time and runway, right? And I think that's why a fractional CMO support will extend your company's runway, because you're not soaking up the resources of full-time people in that marketing space. You got high impact. I'm not the only fractional CMO in the world, right? There are tons of brilliant folks doing this type of work, and it's really about leveraging their time to get the most out of it. And the fact that, I joke with people that I work 90-minute hours, right? And that my outcomes in a 1 hour period of time is the amount of time you get out of someone in 90 minutes, right? And so the high impact work with those folks is really where you're going to see the most impact.
Right. So another term that was, that intrigued me and I didn't understand it when I was reading about you, that, there's something that you use called an Enneagram 7 personality. And I hope I have the pronunciation
Yep.
right.
Yep.
How has your Enneagram personality influenced your approach to marketing and leadership in the edtech space?
Yeah, so it's my built-in excuse to be crazy. No,
Okay.
I think so. So for those who aren't familiar, the Enneagram personality assessment, and you can Google it. There's a free version. You can do a paid version. Essentially, most people have done one of these kind of personality assessments, Myers-Briggs,
Yeah.
and spirituality, and love language, and all these things. I've noticed anyone that I take or my wife takes, they all point to the same common themes of the person, right? And so I'm a fan of taking multiple personality tests,
Mhm.
but the number 7 in my company name, GR7, is my personality assessment is a 7, and essentially you get a number for your score, and that dictates the type of personality you are, and helps you to be reflective and understand how you respond to different situations and stress and excitement with work. And so a 7 is an enthusiast, right? And so and that's why I say it's my excuse to be crazy, is that an Enneagram 7 oftentimes gravitates towards new and exciting things, which I feel like is what I attribute to the fact that I was at a chatbot company before ChatGPT. I was at a video event company before COVID. I was at, a marketing agency before digital advertising was big. So I was doing fractional CMO work before fractional CMOs was a big
Yeah.
thing for a lot of people, right? And so I own that, and I put it in my title name, right? And I bring it to everything that I do, and I explain it
Mhm.
to any company that I'm working with, to the team, that this is my, I'm the ideas guy, right? I can sit and listen to all the challenges and all the programs, and I've got a process for when I'm working with a company
Yeah.
on assessing their marketing strategies, et cetera. But at the end of the day, I look at what are the big ideas, what are the crazy ways we can kind of own positioning and reevaluate who we are, and that I feel like is why I'm really good at helping companies define their why, right? Is because that's where a lot of people struggle. They're really good at the what. They're really good at saying we do this, but they can't really define why they exist, which then has zero they have zero ability to create urgency in their sales process,
Mhm.
because there's no big picture category changing issue that they're solving for. They're a vitamin, not a medicine, right? And so helping companies in that way is something that I feel like 7s are uniquely positioned to be able to do. I think a 7 needs a good 1 to keep them on track.
Yeah.
Companies I've worked with, I've had great experience working with some 1s, and there's a need to kind of rein in the creatives sometimes, but I would rather have a 7 going bonkers on all of the ideas, and coming up and inspiring action and getting people excited, than be boring and not impactful, right? And so that's why I own that number, and I put it in my company, and it's part of who I am.
Absolutely. And on that note, Gil, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me about your own incredible journey. I think my conversation with you about a fractional CMO was certainly an eye opener for me because of the dimensions that you handle. And I'm sure my viewers and listeners will have learned many new things from you, as indeed I did. Thank you for talking to me about some of the common marketing mistakes startup entrepreneurs make. We also covered some interesting factors relating to the use of data, how important social media is, how you are tailoring marketing strategy for so many different segments that you handle in EdTech. You spoke a little bit about storytelling and how important storytelling is. And finally, you also spoke about Enneagram 7 and the importance of 7. And both of them, I learned something new from you. Thank you for speaking to me and good luck to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.